Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on behalf of the PD Committee for NJTESOL-NJBE. We are so excited to present tonight's presentation, Small Group Reading Instruction, How to Incorporate Decodable and Authentic Texts for Multilingual Learners. I am so excited to introduce to you my dear friend and mentor, Christina Borman. I completed my Orton Gillingham training with Christina. I just want to tell you a little bit about her. We are so lucky to have her present tonight. So for over a decade, Christina has supported students with dyslexia and reading difficulties. She's SERI certified structured literacy dyslexia specialist and an IMSLEC certified Orton Gillingham teacher. She's committed to expanding her expertise. She's earned a master's degree in reading from the College of New Jersey, along with a reading specialist certification. Additionally, she has trained in multiple linguistic phonics programs, including Reading Simplified. Beyond direct instruction, Christina enjoys her role as a literacy coach, where she supports educators with data analysis and high-quality literacy instruction. She provides professional development for teachers and administrators on structured literacy, response to intervention, and data-driven instruction. She has presented at several NJPSA, FEA, NJASCD conferences, and has published articles in Educational Viewpoints. Thank you so much, Christina, for joining us tonight.
And thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our discussion about small group reading instruction with a focus on decodable and authentic text for our MLs. So let's take a brief look at our agenda for this evening. Okay, so here's some of the topics that we'll cover, and we'll dive right in. Okay, so to get started, I think it's important to have a little bit of background information about the essential components of reading instruction. So in 2000, the National Reading Panel came together with an objective of identifying the best methods for teaching children how to read. So they considered over 100,000 studies to determine evidence-based reading strategies. And through their findings, they provided recommendations to improve education in schools. So here you can see those 5 areas that they deemed as the essential pillars of reading instruction. So they include phonemic awareness, which is recognizing and manipulating sounds and words. That helps later with reading and spelling. You'll see phonics, which is that systematic instruction that helps children decode words and link the letters and sounds together. Fluency, which has to do with the accuracy in which we read words, and that ease, which leads to later comprehension. You'll see the vocabulary development is essential and should be taught both directly and indirectly. And then lastly, that pillar is comprehension, which is making meaning of text and obviously the goal of reading overall.
And as we have discussed in prior PLCs, because the National Reading Panel did not look at studies on multilingual learners, language minority students, the panel on language minority youth was convened after the National Reading Panel report to look at what works for multilingual learners. And it was found that these same pillars of reading also apply to best practices for teaching multilingual learners how to read, just with some adjustments with scaffolds. And we added at the bottom of this, of the 5 pillars, the oral language development piece, which we know as multilingual learner educators is crucial to integrate into our literacy instruction.
And another important understanding when we're thinking about literacy development is Scarborough's reading rope. So this visual framework illustrates how skilled reading interacts between both language comprehension and word recognition. So you'll see the top strands include language comprehension skills like background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures. And then those bottom strands include word recognition skills like phonological awareness, decoding, sight word recognition. And you'll see as these sub-skills become more tightly intertwined, they develop fluent, meaningful reading or skilled reading. So this reminds us that our reading instruction needs to be comprehensive and address both strands, those upper and lower strands. And we'll talk about how both are important in today's discussion. Okay, so now we're going to look at the types of texts that we'll see typically in schools today. All right, so the first type of text is leveled readers. And these are books that have been sorted into categories, usually like a letter or number system, to signal to the educator how difficult a book is to read. And they typically show up in a guided reading or balanced literacy classroom. So interestingly, when I was, doing some research to prepare, in 2020, EdWeek did a research survey and found out that about 61% of K-2 teachers use level text during small group work. So I would say they're very prevalent in classrooms. Some examples of leveling systems would include DRA, F&P, Rigby readers, or reading A to Z. And leveled text can also be described as predictable or repetitive, especially at those early levels, specifically like A through D. An example would be something like you'll see in the text, like the girl plays with a doll, the girl plays with the car, the girl plays with the ball, and you'll see like a repeated pattern, which makes us believe as educators, wow, this kid is really reading. But we notice that they're learning a pattern and able to follow that pattern. These types of texts generally encourage students to use context or meaning. They'll use visuals such as pictures or letters to guess what a word might mean or what a word might be. So in that example, if they're saying the girl plays with and the picture has a girl holding a doll, the child will likely say doll because they're using the picture instead of their decoding skills to figure out those unknown words. And this is not really supported by the science of reading. Another type of text that we see in schools is decodable texts. So decodable texts focus on words with regular letter-sound relationships, and they have been written to repeat that phonics pattern and the high-frequency words that the beginning reader has learned throughout the text. So the goal of these texts is to give students the opportunity to read books that mirror their scope and sequence of their phonics instruction, so they can immediately practice the skills they are learning in the context of a connected text. So for example, if a student has learned, the SH sound in their phonics instruction, the text that they're going to have in front of them will have a lot of those SH words and all of the previous skills as well. So you'll see those short vowels, the things that they learned before. This controlled practice and repetition with the text has been found through research to be really beneficial for reading accuracy and a student's ability to decode words. So sometimes teachers will use them in a whole group setting, a small group, an intervention type setting, depending on a student's needs. So here's an example of a leveled text that would be designed for like an early reader. Some things to point out with the leveled reader, you'll notice that in the title right away, you'll see AR, which is a skill that's typically introduced later on in a scope and sequence, that bossy R, a more complex sound. If you look over at the table of contents, really in the whole table of contents, I only see 2 decodable words that a student would be able to read at that early level. The word and list are easily decodable. And when we take a peek at the pages, you'll notice that there's a heavy reliance on picture support to figure out those more complex words. I wouldn't necessarily expect an early reader to sound out the word model because it has a lot of complex sounds. When we look at a decodable text example, you'll see that it follows a clear scope and sequence that aligns with the phonics instruction. So it really systematically lays out what skills happen in that sequential order. You'll notice the pictures are more for enjoyment, not really decoding support, and that most of the words are soundable, and the high frequency words are also systematically taught within the scope and sequence. Okay, so in 2023, we had a revision of our New Jersey student learning standards. And here's just a snapshot of the kindergarten standards. And I really wanted to point out some highlights. You'll see that there's an emphasis on decoding skills and letter sound correspondences to decode in the early literacy instruction. There's no mention of leveled readers as a tool for primary instruction. You'll see that there's more of a reliance on decoding, not guessing strategies or using pictures to figure out words. And you'll also see that the skills gradually build on one another. So starting with like least complex to more complex. Okay, so here's a little quiz for everybody here. So I want you to take a minute to read these sentences from two different texts aimed at instructing like an early reader, maybe a typical kindergartner, or it could be like a third grader who's at that beginning reading proficiency level in English. And I want you to consider which one comes from a level text and which comes from a decodable text. And you can put your guess in the chat. And we numbered them to make it easy. So go ahead and put your guess in which you think would be a decodable, which one you think might be a leveled text.
Okay, so can you see the chat? Okay.
I can, it's popping up for me, thank you. So I think we have some really knowledgeable participants today. So sentence one definitely is from a decodable text. All those words have a one-to-one letter correspondence using those most common consonant and short vowel sounds. Sentence two does come from a leveled text. And you'll notice many of those letter sound correspondence, while they may be typical, like OA usually does make that long O sound, it's a little more complex for an early reader to read. You'll also see there's some two-syllable words, some suffixes, which would be a challenge for an early reader to handle all at once when they're learning how to decode and get through those early skills. So good job, everybody. Okay. We also need to remember that decodable texts have their limitations. So research doesn't support the idea that decodable books should be used alone, like students only exposed to decodable text, or for a prolonged period of time. But there is really no specific agreement on the exact amount of time a student needs to spend practicing with a highly decodable or controlled text. So some students may need the support of a highly decodable text longer than others, depending on their reading development or their proficiency levels. So this is where authentic text comes in as well. So authentic text can also be called trade books. I've heard some people call them, but these are really materials that are written for real world purposes, not really just for instruction. So like a picture book, a storybook, articles, poems, informational texts are all examples of more of those authentic texts. So by looking at this chart, you'll see in kindergarten, we're exposing most of our students to decodable readers during that independent reading time, since they're not yet able to read authentic text on their own. And in the right-hand column, you'll notice that the teacher read-alouds are consistent throughout elementary school. So this provides students with what we call like that healthy reading diet. So they're exposed to that rich language, the varied sentence structure, those complex ideas, even though they can't read those texts on their own. As students progress throughout the grades, you'll notice a little bit of a shift from the amount of time or emphasis put into each type of text. So by third grade, we have probably few students and less amount of time students are on decodable texts. and more authentic or trade books are spent for independent reading time. And remember, again, these recommendations are for typical students, and our ML population might not follow this typical profile. They might be in decodable text a lot longer, depending on a variety of factors.
We also added the proficiency levels on the left, so you can see an ML might get here in the 4th grade, and they'll be at a proficiency level 1 or 2. So they're going to follow more of like that K1 track at first, and then as we infuse that oral language instruction and they become more proficient in their speaking, then over time we will follow the same structure. But because language acquisition when our students come here is not grade dependent, we want to also take into account their proficiency levels.
And I often get the question, like, when do you know it's time to shift away from decodable text? And like I said, there's not an exact science, but this is like as close as I could find to getting some more information about the types of skills a student might need to like handle the more authentic text on their own. So some things that they'll be able to do is like read 1-syllable words with short vowels, digraphs, blends. They'll have to know a little bit about magic E and R-controlled vowels. They should be able to read some 2-syllable words and reading about like 35 words per minute in a decodable text with pretty high accuracy. So this might be something that you'll reference like when you're kind of on the fence about when to bring them into more authentic texts. Okay, so now we're going to talk more about the problems or challenges with leveled text and what that means for our instruction. And I always love this phrase, and I have this hanging up in my classroom. Leveled texts lead to leveled lives. And it's just helpful to remember that restricting our students to materials based solely on their perceived reading levels really limits their potential. So this restriction may cause a cycle of low expectation where students are never really exposed to more challenging or diverse material and can really impact their future opportunities. So we're really limiting them instead of providing them either with the scaffolds to learn how to read or providing them with the grade level text and giving them those scaffolds to access it. We don't want to just hold them in that leveled boundary. Okay, so I borrowed this chart on assessment from Margaret Goldberg at The Right to Read, and we linked her blog, and we'll share it at the end. We have a Padlet. And there are a lot of contradictions between what Fontes and Pinnell's assessment tool shows us and what the Fontes and Pinnell creators actually intended. So I'll point out a few examples here. So one example is you might assess a child and find that they read at a level H. And that's a typical practice that we see in schools. And that the teacher would only provide the student with level H books for the child to read. When in fact, Fontes and Pinnell actually intended for students to read a variety of books across the day. Another thing that we get from the assessment is that just because a child is able to read a level G book about bubbles does not mean that they can necessarily read a level G book about polar bears or transportation. We know that there's so much more that goes into a student's reading ability, and we're going to look at that research in just a minute. So even if you don't use this assessment tool to assess students, we know a lot of schools are using reading levels or reading level assessments, and this information might help you either talk to colleagues or explain the flaws with leveling to parents and just have an overall better understanding. All right. So we're going to continue to look at why reading levels are inaccurate by looking at the role that background knowledge actually plays through this baseball study. So this study from 1988 came from Rex and Leslie, and they sought out to compare reading comprehension of 4 different groups of 7th and 8th grade students. So here are the categories that they broke their students into. They had, in the yellow, high reading ability and high knowledge of baseball. In the blue, they had high reading ability, low knowledge of baseball. And in the green, low reading ability, high knowledge of baseball. And in category 4, they had students with low reading ability and low knowledge of baseball. So I want you to take a minute and think about which group do you think scored the best to the worst, and you can rank them by color in the chat. I want you to just take a guess on how you think they performed on the comprehension assessment. All right, we have some guesses coming in. So what researchers actually found is that students with low reading ability and high knowledge of baseball scored almost as well, or just about as well, as students with high reading ability and high knowledge of baseball. Okay, so we can kind of understand a few things from that data, and this data has also been replicated several times, so we get more research out of it. So you could go to the next slide. So we know that knowledge of topic has a much bigger impact on comprehension than general reading ability does. And we also know that with sufficient prior knowledge, those low ability students perform similarly to the higher ability students. So really, reading level is not a static thing. It depends on a child's background knowledge, and that knowledge is paramount when it comes to understanding a text. We also know that prior knowledge creates scaffolding for new information. So it helps us build on to new ideas and concepts. And then obviously we need to remember that our students still do need that explicit word recognition instruction. We're not going to abandon that part of it, but this really calls into the importance of working on both strands of that Scarborough's reading rope. We want to strengthen the bottom strands and also those top strands as well. Okay, another flaw with our leveling system is the assessment piece. So at the bottom of this slide, you'll see we pulled out 2 different texts. There's the level E text called the Zoo, which measures at a Lexile level of 330, which is almost the same Lexile as the level H next to it called Trucks. So I think about from that parent perspective, the problems that this can cause with instruction, with data reporting, with sending mixed messaging. So you're saying that these, a level E and a level H are so vast when really they're coming out as a very similar Lexile level. So you might be thinking to yourself, like, what should I be doing if I'm not using a leveling system? And, an effective practice would be to shift to an oral reading fluency measure. These measures are quick, typically 1 minute. They're a reliable way of assessing reading skills and they help us identify our struggling readers, track progress, and inform instruction. The oral reading fluency measures can capture a student's accuracy and their words correct per minute on a grade level passage. And research shows that the oral reading fluency is a solid indicator of overall reading ability, especially because it has such a strong link to comprehension. And an ORF assessment, oral reading fluency, ORF assessment, is typically a part of a universal screener like DIBELS or AIMSweb. And this data is really important because it helps us screen our kids. It can help us progress monitor and provide, ensure that we're providing intervention to the correct students. Okay, so this is the Hasbrook and Tyndall oral reading fluency data, which is a norm tool for evaluating a student's performance on an oral reading fluency passage. So it's widely used to assess monolingual speakers' reading fluency in relation to their grade level expectation and time of year. So these norms make it easier to identify students who might need that additional support.
So
Mhm.
the note we added on the left was just to remind us that even though there are no benchmarks for multilingual learners specifically, these are for our typical monolingual speakers. We should still use these same benchmarks when screening our multilingual learners. We should not be alarmed if our students are in the red, as many of them often are, but we want to use this information as a baseline and to inform instruction, knowing that if they are given that explicit structured literacy instruction with access as well to authentic text, that they can in fact reach grade level norms, and that is our ultimate goal.
Okay. And here you can see a little bit more of a comparison between the ORF assessment and a running record, which are typical of leveling systems. And just to point out, I know we talked about this a little bit, but oral reading fluency is based on research. It's much quicker to administer, whereas running records are not really research-based, and they typically take a lot longer to administer. So those are just some of the highlights. Okay. So we're not gonna tell you to throw away all of your leveled books and that they're bad. All books have a purpose, but we do just want to make sure that we're being intentional about matching the right text to the purpose of the instruction. So we want to use decodable text to support skill instruction in decoding. And we're going to take a look at planning some small group instruction now. So small group instruction really should be based on student data. So we're going to walk you through that process by looking at data of an actual student. So here is the data of the DIBELS data from one of Kathy's students. And it can be challenging to navigate the many subtests that universal screening has. So skilled reading involves the integration of so many skills. I found this chart to be really helpful to identify the most pressing needs for instruction, especially when we see kids showing up with like red area in more than one area. So we want to always, for older students, we typically start at the top of this decision-making tree and work our way down to find that lowest barrier skill. And then for younger students who are learning how to read, or this might be a lower proficiency student, you can start at the bottom and work your way up to find the next skill ready to teach. So looking at the data on the screen, we started at the top. We're looking at comprehension first, right? So this particular student scored a 4, which is considered well below. So when looking at the decision-making tree, you can see that they fell in that weak area. So by following that chart, I'm going to go down to the next area and look at reading fluency. So that reading rate, the number of words per minute. Again, the student scored 57, which is in that well below area, which is considered weak. So I'm going to keep going down. Okay, so this next area is looking at the reading fluency, but in the accuracy area. So this student scored 95%, which is considered below. So again, weak in that area. So now I'm at their word reading. And this is an area where the child came out in benchmark. So we would consider that proficient. So to begin instruction for this particular student, I would begin by teaching multisyllabic decoding, providing a lot of text level reading. So making sure they're exposed to that text frequently with practice decoding multisyllabic words. Okay. So after you kind of go through, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to go back and mention, this is so cool that Amplify, we use Amplify M-Class. They have dual language reports, and you can see this child's Spanish is very solid. So having this information that in their L1, they have a solid literacy foundation, this really helps us to build upon the English. So I just wanted to point that out.
That's so helpful. Yes. Okay, so after using individual student data to group students based on their skill, you'll start to see like little pockets of small groups emerge. If I'm thinking as like a classroom, as an interventionist, I kind of group my students by need and I'll pull out of different classes. And it's important to know that obviously we kind of think of them as these buckets of areas that students need, but we know that it's, skills don't operate in a silo and your small group will probably overlap. So it's not like you can only do phonemic awareness. You're going to incorporate other things, but that's like their primary focus. So that's, yeah. So also when we're planning our small group, there's a couple things that I always like to keep in mind when thinking of, time efficiency and most effective practices. I find that routines really help build consistency for children, and they also help reduce that cognitive load. So I know that in the previous PLC series, there's been some really great presentations on activities that you can do to build those routines. Also, small group instruction should be targeted, intentional, and purposeful. And if it's something that 50% of your class needs or your group needs, you'll teach it as a whole to the whole group. It's not a good use of time. If most of the students need it, you'll teach it to all of them. And providing opportunities for oral reading practice with feedback to develop fluent and accurate reading with expression. And one quote I like from Wiley Blevins, he always says that at least 50% of a phonics lesson should be devoted to reading and writing of connected text for all students, but especially for those who struggle. So we really want to provide a lot of time for students to be reading out loud with you, the expert, giving them feedback to refine their skills. Okay. So we will share this template in our Padlet at the end of the presentation. We have some with example lessons, but also ones that you can edit and use on your own. You'll notice in the lesson planning template, there's a reading objective, there's a language objective for the lesson. You'll obviously choose the text that fits the skill that you're looking to teach. So in this example, I was planning to reinforce the Magic E skill to my students. Okay, before reading, and we'll walk through a little bit of these examples in a minute, but you'll consider before reading which words need clarification. You'll consider some language usage that might be most beneficial to your students. During reading, you'll think about the different ways students can read or reread a text, and then you'll think about after reading some ways that students can interact or make meaning from the text. So we'll look more closely at this. So when we think about preparing students to read a text, we always want to start with those smaller units to build proficiency with accuracy and automaticity, and then kind of build on from the word level. So here's an example of a word list I might use with students, focusing on that Magic E. These are all words that they'll later see in the text, so they're becoming familiar with them, they're becoming automatic, and they'll be prepared to read it in text in a few minutes. Okay, then we'll move to the sentence level. So as much as possible, I like to try to create things in like a game way. So here's like a little roll and read that students are practicing either sentences or phrases from the text that they'll be reading. And if you'll notice, like the first sentence, Niles and Blake mix the cake, connects to sentence 2 or phrase number 2, while Dad gets 1 pan. And then in sentence 3, they're putting that all together. So they're getting practice reading shorter chunks and longer chunks that they'll later see in the text. So really building that fluency. You can even make it like a partner game just to build that engagement as well. And then last, you're going to build them up to that text level. So here's that text. You'll see a lot of those words and sentences that we previously practiced. And obviously, we'll talk a little bit more about the option for writing or drawing above. And students at the early stages of reading, they might spend more time at that word level or the sentence level than the text level. And it will all depend on the students in front of you. So some considerations for our MLs. One caution really is that decodable text sentence structure are often not how we naturally speak, which can make it harder for students to either engage or understand. So something that you might see in a decodable text is the cat did jump instead of the cat jumped. So early in a child's reading development, they might not have learned that ed suffix yet, so you likely won't see that in the text. So I think pointing that out or just being aware of it is something important to know before introducing decodable text. And there's also sometimes some of that unnatural phrasing that you'll explicitly discuss with students. One cool idea, I don't know everyone's familiarity with AI, but it's really helpful to rewrite some decodable text to align with our students' interests or, their needs or using their names. But we always want to try to maintain that phonetic accessibility when we're improving engagement. So we'll show you an example of that on the next slide. So when I was working on creating a TH text for a student, I had a text that I had used before and I put it into ChatGPT and I asked it to rewrite the text using TH words and including soccer and a boy named Tiago. So I knew the boy that I work with loves soccer, so I wanted something that would really engage him and make him interested in reading. So you'll see the text on the right is what AI produced. And sometimes I find that I do have to go back and make sure that, the word choice is correct and make adjustments as needed. And another, interesting thing during this lesson is I had the opportunity to point out how the TH sound, the typical sound, is different than the TH sound in his name, in Tiago. So it was a great learning opportunity. And AI really helped make that possible for me. Okay. So when we're in the pre-reading stages, it's really important that we're clarifying unknown vocabulary words or language demands. I always like to use visuals. This is like a Freyer model that I use with my students. So I'll always have like a student-friendly definition, a sentence so they can hear it in context. I'll have an example, and then I'll include a non-example. And we'll talk about different scenarios using the words. I also provide my MLs and really all students with additional contextualization to help with comprehension. So building up that background knowledge to access what we're about to read. And interestingly, a reader must know the meaning of at least 90% of the content words in a text to be able to comprehend what is read. So they really need to understand most of the words in the text. And teaching words in networks is also helpful. So showing the relationship between words is really helpful when appropriate. So also like encouraging students to use those new vocabulary words in our discussion after modeling the usage of the word. So for example, I might ask a question like, what kinds of foods do you like to consume for breakfast? And then I'll have like sentence stems for them to respond. I like to consume. So like they're practicing using the language that they'll see later in the story.
Christina, you have a question. Do
Oh.
you give them the definition for the Freyer model or do you have them look it up?
I usually give it just because time demands, like I'll have this ready to go. but I'll give opportunities for students to either share like their own sentences or their own examples. Like we'll bring it like, where do you consume your breakfast? I consume my breakfast in the kitchen. So I try to make it engaging where there's discussion, but I'll have this all prepared and ready to go.
And this is so beautiful for language development. So thank you.
And I'll also map the words too. Like consume might be a hard word for a group. So we can tie in those phonics skills as well. Like we might code that word before jumping into the definition. So I try to infuse it all together, but I do have everything like ready to go so it's quick. Good question.
Mm-hmm. So I also wanted to point out just the power of AI using the Adobe Firefly. You can put in any, prompt and it will spit out a picture that aligns with the decodable that you're teaching. So this was about sloths and chicks and feeding pets. So I just put it into AI and it pops out these beautiful pictures that you can use to front load your vocabulary as well. That really like go with the story.
Okay. We also want to be cautious of multiple meaning words. So in this example, you can see that pen is being used as house, like as a house for pets. And students are obviously more familiar with pens being used as like the writing utensil. So this would be something to discuss prior to reading. I know we have another example of that as well. So another example would be like snacks in this context. Snacks is being used as a verb, and obviously students would be familiar with snacks being used as a noun. So this would be something to discuss. A lot of our students would be familiar with like snack time at school, or instead of the actual act of snacking on something, right?
So we also have a lesson for this for you in the Padlet, where we'll walk you through kind of how to front load like the language structures that might be tricky for students. So before reading, you would have the picture and just introduce the language structure. And then, like Christina did with having them use it in sentences like, oh, who do you snack with in the morning? And oh, I snack with my friend. To just get them used to using that language structure that might sound awkward for them.
So during reading, you're going to think about how you want your students to read the text. And if you see on the bottom is like the continuum of types of ways students can read with more or less support. So obviously, if you have a student who's like, pretty solid, I typically have my students reading independently first. In most cases, because we want to allow students that opportunity to practice developing their accuracy. And during that time, I'm monitoring for decoding challenges. I'm checking in with the students in the group. And then I'll have a comprehension discussion after that first read. So I always, even if it's a brief conversation, I always want to, drill home that point that the purpose of reading is for meaning. So even if it's just like one or two questions or just to say something about, the overall understanding of the text. The later reads, you'll determine how best you can support your students. So looking on that continuum, the most support would be to have the teacher reading aloud and students just following. I usually would have them point if they need a lot of support. They can echo you, so you can read, a sentence at a time. They echo back if you're really trying to be purposefully modeling fluency. And there's other structures there, choral reading, where everyone's reading together at the same time, or buddy reading, where one student's reading to the other student and then they switch jobs. And I always have the passive student like pointing to the words and acting as a coach, so they're also actively engaged. All right.
I'd also just like to add, we never want to force a student to read aloud. Typically in our lessons, they're very structured and we're setting them up for success by teaching them exactly what they need. In the decodable, it has all the sounds they've been taught. So typically they are willing to read aloud, but we do want to be cognizant of not forcing anyone to read aloud. And like Christina just said, we can engage them in different ways if they are more reluctant or passive.
All right. So after reading, there are a variety of ways we can check for understanding and show, comprehension of what we read. So one idea is to use use drawings to scaffold comprehension and enhance those oral retelling for stronger language skills. So you can see some examples of drawings there. We can help our MLs visualize the structure of a story, aiding in understanding to key elements of that beginning, middle, and end. You can also provide opportunities for an oral retelling. And all of these skills promote that sequential thinking and organizing thoughts and sequencing events for a clearer communication. So sometimes having them draw first and then practice their oral retelling using their pictures is helpful. Okay. And that's getting us to that point where like this repeated reading is bringing us to a level of fluency. And fluency is defined as that ability to read smoothly and correctly. And there are different elements that that make up fluency. So accuracy is kind of like that primary focus of fluency. They need to be able to decode the words correctly. And then we kind of get into those more complex skills like phrasing. You can group the words into phrases and practice pausing at punctuation. Expression is where you can use your voice to show meaning or feeling. And then our reading rate is reading at that appropriate speed. So just a little visual to help us think about fluency. You see the boy riding with his training wheels on. So first we have that accuracy. So those decodable texts really give us support with the accuracy. And then we have that automaticity where they're taking off without the training wheels and we're seeing them become more automatic. So with the use of decodable text, students really gain that exposure to the phonics patterns in meaningful context, leading to the smoother, more fluent reading over time. And I do attribute a lot of that to the repeated readings. That really helps us get to the goal of fluency there. So just some other ways that we can work on developing fluency with our students. Two good, interventions or strategies. Modeling is the first one. So one of the most significant ways to improve fluency is through modeling, where the teacher or a more proficient reader demonstrates that process of reading aloud, which helps the student really internalize like the rhythm, the pacing, and that expression and prosody in their reading. Another strategy is using repeated reading as an intervention, where the reader practices reading the same passage multiple times, focusing on that increasing accuracy first, and then that automaticity and the way that their voice sounds, that prosody and expression. And we see that research really shows us that readers have better comprehension through repeated exposures as their fluency improves. So it allows their cognitive load to shift from like thinking about how to decode the words to focus on making meaning and understanding the text. And obviously, comprehension is our goal of reading. We want to incorporate some inferential and literal questions, even at the early stages, to show the students that this is why we're reading. I try to provide opportunities for writing about reading as frequently as possible. Reading and writing are really two sides of the same coin, so they support the development of each other. And for comprehension to occur, students really need to read with at least 95% accuracy. So this level of accuracy allows students to really understand the meaning of the text. Okay. We did put together some resources here, but Kathy put them all on a Padlet for us. So maybe we can take a look at that in a moment. Okay.
Sorry, did you want to go there now or should we go?
Well, I want to show this one.
Okay. Okay.
Do you want to tell them about this?
Sure. So at the spring conference, the NJTESOL-NJBE spring conference on Tuesday, May 20th, I'm going to be holding a book discussion on literacy foundations for English learners. This is the book that we gave our giveaway for during the first PLC. So we are very excited to be having this discussion. A lot of these strategies that we've been talking about all year are in this book. Elsa Cardenas-Hagen is the author. She is a bilingual speech pathologist and reading specialist. And so I'm excited to be talking about some evidence-based strategies for multilingual learners, as well as just like a nice Q&A on the PLC series that we had this year. And anything you've tried out that, you want to come to the conference and then discuss, I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have about anything that we've discussed this year. So let's go to questions and then we'll do the Padlet. Does that sound good?
Perfect.
Okay. So any questions before we show you the resources? Okay. Well, I guess we'll just go to the resources then.
Perfect. I'll keep an eye on the chat too.
Oh. So let's see if I can go back up. All right. Can everyone see my resource screen, the Padlet? Christina, can you see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So this Padlet, we divided into just 3 simple categories. You have here your decodable text sources. There are so many great free online sources here. Christina, I'm going to click on this and let you explain a little bit about what this is.
So this is like a little database put together by UFly. So on the left, you'll see the UFly scope and sequence. And on the top, you'll see the different decodable series, and it scrolls all the way out. So if you're looking for other texts that align to UFly scope and sequence, which is free, you can print it. You can get text from any of these other companies and kind of align it to their scope and sequence. So it makes it a little bit easier to find texts that match a scope and sequence. And by the way, UFly does have a lot of free resources and texts already on their website. But if you're looking to kind of like add to that, they started a nice database for the decodable texts.
All right, we have a question. What advice do you have for distinguishing between reading disability and language learning?
Wow, what a good question. And it sounds like a perfect question for your presentation at NJTESOL, Kathy.
Yeah, so I'm going to be doing a presentation with Amy Garner, the co-director of the Scotch Plains Children's Dyslexia Center. But it really does go back to that slide we showed you of the student's dual language report. Because if you look at that slide, you can see the student may be in the red for his comprehension, his reading fluency, but look at his Spanish. We're not concerned because his Spanish is pretty much on grade level. So he may, and in the beginning of the year, this was from the mid-year benchmark, his beginning of the year benchmark, this was all red. So with, explicit instruction, he was able to make that progress to bring him, out of the red in his decoding. And now, as Christina showed you, I'm working on more multisyllabic words with him to get him more up to grade level. But you can see we wouldn't be concerned. This wouldn't be such a red flag because he is making progress and he's not in the red in Spanish. Spanish is a very transparent language. So if your L1 is very transparent and the child has had years of explicit systematic instruction and they're not making progress, or their progress is very slow, and you have the privilege of seeing their L1 and their L2 scores, then that's going to be the best place to start. I know that a lot of us do not have the privilege of the scores in the L1. So
Right.
when we don't have those L1 scores, then you have to look at just the English baseline and the progress that they're making. Again, there are no norms really for multilingual learners. So that's when we start to look at some peer comparisons and things like that. And we are going to go into that at our PLC, not at our PLC, sorry, at the NJTESOL-NJBE screener.
Yeah. And just to add on to that, if you don't have like a platform like Dibbles that helps you with the progress monitoring, it may be helpful to come up. I know, I believe Kathy linked a lot of the Dibbles. Dibbles has free assessment materials. So if you go into the Padlet, you can print like an oral reading fluency passage for your student's grade level and give it to them every week and track their words per minute. And that will help you see if they're making growth over time. Here's where it's linked. Dibbles materials.
So here's the Dibbles materials. Dibbles is great. It's free. So you would just click on download Dibbles materials. So this is the benchmark materials that we give at the beginning, middle, and end of year. And then these are the progress monitoring materials that you would give in between the benchmarks. So let's say you had a student in second grade, you would click grade 2. And again, we will go into this more at our presentation at the conference. I'm presenting on Wednesday, the 21st. But you could look at their nonsense word reading and kind of get a feel for where they're at in their decoding.
Looks like we have another question with regards to building fluency through modeling. Many of our teachers are using mostly video read alouds. Is there any research to the effectiveness of video read alouds as opposed to a teacher model? So I'm not aware of any research. I think it really depends on like the purpose of the video. Is the video like a good model for the student? If not, using like a lot of times like buddy reading or peer models is helpful, or exposing them to different readers. But I don't believe there's any research. I think hearing fluent reading is, effective modeling. I don't believe there's research. Are you aware of any, Kathy?
I'm not, and I agree. I think there's really no substitution for, reading it to the class in real time. So I agree. I'm not a fan of the video. I mean, sometimes it can be fun, but yeah.
And it also depends on the purpose as well. Like if there's like a listening component, if you're assessing listening skills. But yeah, I think there's other ways to provide a model as well.
So let's just look real quick at the lesson template. All right, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So Christina and I are so excited about this. We just put this together for you. So we have the reading and language objectives at the top, and then you can see the different components, the before, during, and after reading. So Christina, do you want to walk through your lesson, and then I can quickly walk through mine?
Sure. So before reading, I pulled out some words to clarify at the top. I used the sentence frame for prediction in this text. So students would have that sentence frame, I predict we will read about. And then we tried to make little check boxes so you're not always having to reinvent the wheel. You can kind of just check and write. We would be building our knowledge and oral language around kitchen utensils, which would be apparent in the story. We also wanted to point out having an opportunity to think about some native language or cultural connections, and really tie in that word level before reading. So for this particular text, I chose to have the students read the text independently first for accuracy. And then after, our consecutive read would be a choral read. So we worked on like that group reading for fluency. After reading, we would have like some discussion, a comprehension discussion. I posted a literal and inferential question. We would work on retelling and also like reenacting using role play to retell. So those are some of the check boxes for ideas for students to do. And then at the bottom, you'll see like the lesson resources. So here's the word list that we would read. And then some sentence work to build that fluency knowledge, and then the text with an opportunity for the retelling through drawing above, where then they would reenact it afterwards.
Okay, and then I did, oops, that was the same one. I did a lesson on suffix S. So I actually used a UFly text that was originally for, I think, digraphs, but there was so many suffix S's in it that I decided I was just going to use it for suffix S. My students had already been taught. They knew their CK, their CH, they knew their TH, their digraphs, but I liked it for the suffix S. So again, my words to clarify for either meaning or confusion, like we showed you, the pen could be confusing, or using snack as a verb as opposed to a noun. Opportunities to talk beforehand. So just talking about pets. Do you have pets in your native country? Do you have pets? A lot of our students leave pets behind or have different kinds of pets. So just talking a little bit about that. During reading, again, they're reading independently first, and then we do a choral read, and then maybe independent again, talking about comprehension, some literal and inferential questions, just to make sure that they did understand.
And can I jump in really quick, Kathy?
Yeah.
One thing, this might seem like a lot, and it doesn't have to all happen in the course of like one session. You might like do the independent read one day, and then the second day come back and do like that choral reading. So you can break it up. It doesn't have to be over the course of just one session or one day.
Yes, thank you. And then also doing some writing work afterwards, writing about the story, coding some sentences if we're looking at who and what and when and where. So I will show you some of that work as well. But like Christina showed, here would be some words building up to the text, then some sentences pulled from the text, and then the text right here. So that you can find under the lesson plan templates. And then here are some more materials for you. So teaching the suffix S, how it means more than one, but it means if it's at the end of a verb, it means the subject is singular. So that can be tricky for our kids. It also has two sounds, this or the Z at the end of a word. So there are some instructional materials in here for you, a little poster talking about the suffix S. I have the nouns or subject highlighted in red and the verbs in yellow, and then the suffix comes at the end of the word, so we highlight that in red as well. And then this is in subsequent lessons, you can do some sentence work. So, or part of speech work with sentences. So for example, the bugs run on the sticks on the blacktop. So students would read the sentence, they could highlight the who in red, the what in yellow, the when in green, the where in purple. So you're asking them these questions, you know, who ran and, you know, what did they run on or where did they run, things like that. So this is very multisensory because they're using color, we're speaking, and then they can write the answer on the side. They can make up their own sentence. Okay, what did the bugs do next? We need a who, a what, a where. It's all color coded. So this is nice and scaffolded to help students create sentences. And then here is some of the pre-reading front loading that we talked about. Front loading those vocabulary words that might be tricky. She's dragging her bag. What might that look like? Her bag of snacks. Discussing how sloths snack. Sloths are snacking. Snack can be used as a verb or a noun. Asking them, who do you snack with? What do you feed your pets? What snacks do you give them? Maria is snacking with her chicks. So just helping them to understand those language structures and be a little bit familiar with them before they encounter them in the text. And then post-reading, I added the sentences so we could talk about that as well, how the S is at the end of sloths. And snack here is the verb. So we highlighted that in yellow. So again, just supporting their understanding of parts of speech. There's a lot of different directions you can go with decodable texts. You know, after reading them, you can use them in a lot of different ways. So we just wanted to give you some options. And then this is like a scaffolded retelling. So we would read the retelling here. They can then fill in the missing words. And I gave you just some blank ones. This would be less scaffolded. Say your students are more advanced and they, you know, you could construct a retelling together, and using those colors to help them build sentences, I find is very helpful. All right, anything else we want to go over in the Padlet?
I think we did include some of the AI tools that we mentioned, if you're interested in trying them out. I think those are really helpful when creating text. I know the Lit Lab has some free decodable resources, but only until the end of April. So if you want to join, you can get free access until the end of April, and they have a bunch of free decodable texts if you're looking to like kind of start your library.
This is a great website. I highly recommend signing up. There are only 92 spots left, so. I also love Claude. Claude is a great tool for educators. I think it's highly, highly useful for building decodables or just like getting words, word lists, things like that. It's very, very helpful.
You could always type in like produce, you know, short vowel words with the SH digraph or whatever skill you're looking for. You can be specific and help you generate some of those things. What about the repeated reading chart, like where teachers can
I think that's here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, oh, also, and the Spanish resources you sent.
Oh, yeah, we could show that.
Mhm.
But for those of you who don't have like a progress monitoring tool, something like this chart might be helpful to get started. Can you scroll down, Kathy?
Yes, let me see. Here we go.
So they can track their reading here. And then there's also a chart, I believe, on the next page. So like over time, you can see how they're progressing. So if you print those free Dibbles passages, you can use a sheet like this and show the progress. So if your student isn't making progress over, you know, a few weeks of intensive instruction, you might start to be like, what's going on with this student? Why aren't they making as much progress as I hoped? So just some different charts to help share that data or track it over time is helpful.
Yeah, these are great. And then let me get the Spanish materials. I think this is new.
Yeah, I happened to go on today.
So this is great.
So FCRR is great in general. On the left side, you'll see a bunch of different categories. So kindergarten and first grade would be all free pre-made center materials in a variety of areas. So phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, like whatever area you're looking to provide support in. They have pre-made activities that you could just click and print. But a new feature, at least new for me, is the Spanish student activities. So kind of following the same structure as their other skills like phonics, phonemic awareness, but all in Spanish, which is wonderful.
It really is. And if you have, you know, a student who might benefit from building those Spanish literacy skills to help bridge to English, this is a great resource to pull some activities and target areas that they might need help with. And then so I just wanted to also point everyone to the New Jersey Department of Education Working Group on Student Literacy Report. It was just released this past week. Jenna Maneri and I were on the committee representing NJTESOL-NJBE. So we are looking forward to continuing our work and supporting our multilingual learners as the new legislation goes into effect this fall for universal screening. So please check out that document. It is right here for your reference. And this is also a really helpful document right here, right next to it. It is the practice guide on effective literacy instruction for multilingual learners. So that is a very helpful document as well. And here's the decision tree. If you'd like a copy of that, we put that in there. And I think that's it. So if there are no questions, you can get your PD certificate. It is linked at the bottom here. And then I think it should also be in the chat.
Yes, it is posted in the chat.
Okay, great.
Thank you.